How's everybody doing? You all sound a little dead after that. How y'all doing? Okay, my name is Davey D. President Liz is going to introduce me, but I wanted to kind of start off with these clips for a reason. So I'll just introduce myself. I'm a longtime journalist. I teach over at San Francisco State out of the Africana Studies Department. I'm also the host or co-host of Hard Knock Radio, which is, airs daily here in the Bay Area and is heard maybe in about 10, 12 states around the country. I wanted to play this clip because, I was trying to think, what are we going to talk about tonight? There's so much going on, and we're at a historical moment. 2016, whether we like it or not, is going to be a year that people are going to look back in time and ask questions like, what was going on at that period in time? We have a battle of ideologies taking place right before us. We have white nationalism being pushed by one candidate. We have corporatism being pushed by another. We have socialism, for the first time, being front and center. And we have a lot of people who are just plain old turned off by the system, period. And this collision is making for interesting observation, at least from a journalist standpoint. We're seeing that the stops are being pulled out. People are playing for keeps. And if there's one thing that you would get out of this conversation with me tonight, is to be very clear, at least I'm very clear, there is a war. It's not a war overseas. I mean, that's been happening, and there's all types of countries that we can point to and say there's conflict. But there's a war going on right here in the United States, and it involves those who are in power, and they're competing with one another as to which direction that power is going to go on, and war is being waged against people like you, me, folks who have the potential to challenge that power. So it may be students sitting here who are idealistic in their outlook and who are asking questions and saying, you know what, how come 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2 when you are talking a certain type of rhetoric? Why isn't your actions matching up with the ideals that you're pushing? People don't like that. Folks are sitting here having to take out incredible amounts of student loans, $30,000, $40,000. I have students that are $60,000 in debt and they ain't even graduate yet. And they're not going to find a job that's going to be able to comfortably allow them to pay that back, at least if they're going to live here, because they got $4,000 and $5,000 rent that they're going to have to pay on top of other expenses. And this is happening at universities that were once upon a time free. Let's think about that for a minute. Some of the people that are advocating that you go up in your tuition were ones who went to school for free. I remember when I went to Cal, people were protesting because it was $200 a semester. People can't believe it was only $200 a semester. I can't believe it was $200 a semester. I graduated in 6 years and owed something like $1,700, and I was pissed off. I was like, man, $1,700? I got to pay that back? That's what some people are paying for a couple of classes. So people are asking, what's going on with this? How's this happening? And that's just one of many questions. We can go down the list. We could talk about police brutality or terrorism. We could talk about climate change and what that means. We could talk about women's rights being encroached upon, the 30+ laws that have been passed all over the country that limit your right to an abortion. We could talk about how you're supposed to have access to health care, but in many states around this country, including the one that my partner's from, you can't get that Obamacare, at least not without going through a whole lot of hoops. So what is this about? Is it about money? I mean, how much money can they take from us? How much money do you all have in the pocket that's really going to satisfy people who are making billions and trillions? It can't be about the money, because I don't think any of us in this room are really balling to the point that our money individually or collectively is really going to make a difference in the scheme of things. This is about making sure that those who are in power remain in power, and looking at the landscape and saying to themselves, who are potential enemies? Is it the students getting enlightened? What's the game plan to keep them dumbed down? And how do we start with that game plan? So we may start early in life. So if you're about 19, 20 years old, you went through No Child Left Behind, starting in 2003. So you learned to take a test. So by the time you get up into college, critical thinking that would be intuitive for those who are a little bit older is something that's very difficult or foreign for most. And I'm not saying it's everybody in this room, but as somebody who's teaching 200 and 300 students, I could tell you, I've had Chuck D in my classroom. I've had people who are landmark figures sitting up in the classroom, and anybody got any questions? What's going to be on the test? That's No Child Left Behind. That's the legacy of that. And I understand that. That was the game plan to keep potential enemy from rising up. Keep them distracted. Let them know about the Kardashians more than they know about the shootings that took place at the Ivory Coast last week. You know, when they shot up the beach resort. We're not talking about that. Or the 26,000 people that were killed in Nigeria by terrorists. Let's talk about that. So it's very deliberate, but that's just one of many enemies. It may be seniors who've been around, who remember what happened in the heydays of the 60s, baby boomers who are now aging, who remember what the fights were about, and they're very clear, and they can see history repeating itself. But now the concerns may be, do you have enough money to retire on? Your pensions have been taken. People are talking about getting rid of Social Security, and you got a younger population that don't even understand the value of that, so they'll cheer along and say, yeah, we should get rid of that Social Security. So you got a lot of folks who would really be out there kicking up dust who now have to worry whether or not they're going to have enough to survive on. It's no accident that you got 1 out of 7 people in this country living below the poverty level. 1 out of 4 if you're talking about people from a different age younger age bracket. So that's another group of people that we have to deal with, the enemies. Then you got black and brown folks. So we got to get walls for the brown folks, because those 40 million people who might classify themselves as Latino, Hispanic, brown, all of them are here illegal if you allow the people that are running for office to say so, if you believe what they're talking about, the policies that are being pushed, the cheering that you'll see in some sectors of this country when they say, let's build a wall and let's check everybody's papers, make sure they're here legally, and we'll just forget about history as to whether or not people were actually here before these states came here. So that's an enemy that we have to oppress. And then, you know, black folks have been under the gun, still under the gun. And we could go through a whole litany of this, but I wanted to start off the conversation by showing a few videos. I wanted to show one from some people out of Pittsburgh, Jasiri X, who teamed up with a legendary hip-hop pioneer named Paradise Gray, and they did a song called The Babies, sampling Gil Scott and showing the work that they're doing, landmark work right now in Pittsburgh. They have a whole school in which they teach young people media, young people from the hood. They're the ones that edited and shot the video. Incredible work that they're doing. We're talking about 12, 13, 14-year-old kids that people have written off and said they can't do anything. But people were finding a way out of no way. And you saw the product of that. Then I wanted to juxtapose that with a video about who the real gangsters are. Because if you leave it up to mass media, the gangsters are the thugs, people with the hats on the side and gold teeth, who say, what's up, and look a certain way. They're the gangsters. Not the people who foreclosed on many of our houses, who are raising our fees, who are doing all sorts of atrocities on Wall Street, who tanked our economy, and not one person went to jail, except maybe Bernie Madoff or somebody. But the real gangsters are the people that live in the barrios and live in the hood. How do we get to that point? So that's something to think about. I ended it by playing a video that came out on ABC News in 1977. It was on a show called Like It Is, which was a news show, and it featured this gentleman by the name of Dart Hart Perry, who worked for the FBI, and it's a whole hour-long series. You just saw a snippet of it, and he was pretty much talking about, hey, look, this is all the stuff we did. We burnt down the Watch Writers Workshop. We were told to get married to people just so we could disrupt the movements. It's an incredible documentary. Couldn't find it when I was growing up, but then, thank God for YouTube, and I went and found it, and you can actually see the comments because the people that he impacted actually commented on YouTube. Like, I remember that dude. I remember him. He broke our dad's heart when he burnt down the Watch Writers Workshop. And what was that about? This is 1977 that he's talking about this, right? So, at the time, people wouldn't have believed it. It's like maybe he's exaggerating until the Freedom of Information papers came out. They said, wow, they really did it, but that's been kind of swept under the rug. But here, in 2016, in this historical moment, we were introduced to another piece of news. Talking about the Nixon administration, when this burning took place, who had a law and order mandate when he came into office in 1968, at the height of the free speech and anti-war movements, at the height of the Black Power movement, which had shifted from fighting for civil rights to becoming a more militant type of like, we want Black Power. We're going to push back. Panthers are out there doing what they're doing. Brown Berets, and everybody is kicking up dust and demanding equality for everybody. And it was at this point that Nixon declared a war on drugs. People have heard about that war on drugs, and many of us have grown up just assuming that the war on drugs was justified. Because those people in the hood are smoking crack. We all know the stories. They're selling drugs, they're shooting each other, all these different things. To the point that it's hard for many people to shake that stigma. But here we have one of Nixon's aides, John Ehrlichman, who died back in 1999, but apparently in an interview that is now running on Harper's Magazine, he's talking about, look, this war on drugs, we made it up. There's no real war, but we had two enemies. And the enemies that we needed to declare war on, and we needed to find a legal way to do it, were students like yourself, who may have been sitting in a Sonoma State auditorium, listening to lectures about why we shouldn't be in Vietnam, and why we should be part of a global community and not have imperialistic tendencies and all that, and was challenging the system in 1968. It was like, these people need to be stopped. So you know what we're going to do? We're going to declare war on drugs. We're going to call this group of students the far left, put the word hippies, and say that all they do is smoke marijuana. And what they're fighting for and the issues that they're raising are going to be discredited. Because how can you be on point when all you do is smoke marijuana all day? It's the thought. Black people who had taken a more militant approach were also seen as the enemy. And this is what Ehrlich says. He says these were two enemies, the far left and black people. So we're going to associate black people with heroin. And all of a sudden in the communities, and I was a young kid to remember, living in the Bronx, just flooded the community. Just came out of, it's like people weren't flying planes or anything like that. There was no El Chapo, running a cartel that was bringing it up into our communities, but it got there. I mean, we all seen the Frank Lucas movies and American Gangster, and we kind of know what's going on now, 30, 40 years after the fact, but at the time the communities were ravaged. And as he said, we used the war on drugs as an excuse to arrest people, to oppress or repress their leaders, raid homes, and do all sorts of stuff. Why is it important to know that? And that was 40 years ago. You can see that war on drugs carrying itself out all the way up to 2016. It was just 6 months ago that you saw tanks, not just in Ferguson, but in West Oakland. Military hardware, under the guise of looking for people, fighting the war on drugs. What was a shock for many people who saw it prime time was a routine occurrence in many of our communities where that has happened. And when you live in those communities, you go, yeah, there's some people that sell. But they're no different than the folks that may be up in a Humboldt County or even here that may have a grow house. I mean, they're just trying to make ends meet. This isn't a career. This is like the economy's messed up. How am I going to make it? And how am I going to make it, from point A to point B? But this war has left a lasting imprint. It's cost us billions of dollars. It's made us the largest incarceration country, or people with the most folks in jail in the world. And it's put a stigma on everybody's back. So before they see a human being, they go, maybe he's a drug dealer. I was concerned when I came up here. Should I wear my red jacket? Or should I put my black jacket on? Because, once you leave out of Oakland, they have a colored thing, and they might think I'm in a gang, and it's a tracksuit, and they might think, maybe I'm a member of a gang, even though I'm in my late 40s and, never been arrested, and I teach, among other things. But that hasn't stopped folks from being pulled over and investigated, because that war on drugs, as he said, allowed the folks to do that. And that's happening now. Do we not know people who have gone through this? Am I talking to a brick wall on this? We know this is going on. So, this war that is now been admitted to, question is, what's being done in this historical moment? You don't really hear our presidential candidates talking about it. You don't hear them saying, this was messed up. We need to correct what was wrong. We need to find out if anybody's in jail because of that illegal war. If people were set up, and we need to make sure that they're out and their families are repaired. And we need to make this an issue and make sure that what took place in 1971 didn't corrode the system so much that it's permanently tainted just the outlook in which people operate. You don't hear people saying, when I become president, we're going to clean house. People ain't talking about it at all. Have you heard them talk about it? Anybody say anything in the debates? This is not the first time we heard that this war on drugs may have been inspired by the government in a creative way. We know about COINTELPRO under J. Edgar Hoover. We know about the CIA and crack with Gary Webb. We've all heard about that, right? And each time people have pushed it under the rug. No, it can't be true. But now one of their own has admitted it. And now everybody's kind of like, that war on drugs happened. But in this historical moment, we now move to a point where truth doesn't even matter anymore. Like, I can tell you the truth, don't matter. Means nothing. It's meaningless. So that's the challenge we have. When we talk about this war, we know that it put in motion a set of policies that have been carried out to this day. Back in the 70s, it was the ominous crime bill, which for the first time allowed the federal government to work with local police departments, domestic spying, all-time high, and a host of other things that were just very intrusive. And we've seen that carry all the way up to 2016. We've seen battle lines drawn around that. Wireless phone taps, stop and frisk, people able to spy on you through your iPhone and smart TVs, all that sort of stuff. Now it's maybe under the guise, if it's white folks, it's usually we're looking for terrorists. If it's black folks, it's still a war on drugs. But nevertheless, these things are in motion now. And why we look at these policies, and we can, at least I come to the conclusion that there is this war being waged on people in this country. These policies could not take place without one important institution, which all of us are subjected to, and that's media. That's the journalist. And I would say, as a journalist, understanding how the media has been complicit in shaping opinions and getting people to think a certain way and adopt a certain set of attitudes, that journalism is a tool of war. If you get anything out of that, understand journalism is a tool of war. The question is, what side of this war are you on? Some of my colleagues are very eager to have access and to have fame. So I've been at places, I've been in rooms where people have literally sold their souls and told lies to the people. Let me give you a clear example. Back in, I want to say it was 2006 or 2007, they had what was known as the G8 Summit, and it was in Scotland. And it was around this time that they had these bombings in London. And I happened to be in London, it was in July when they had these bombings, and it was like, this is London's 9/11. And I was there, you know, and we were like, okay, as a journalist, let's go cover it. We had just landed. I was in the car, the cab, with somebody from CNN, Christian Science Monitor, and ABC News. And we're listening to the BBC as we're driving into Center City. And they're like, there are 39 people injured at the hospital. The Edgware station was bombed. There was another station, I'm going to remember what it is, but they named off a couple of things. And the guy from ABC has a phone, and he gets a call, and he's like, can you all be quiet? And he is now going on the air live. So I'm like, okay, what's he going to do? And he parrots everything that he just heard on the BBC, but he adds a little bit more drama to it. So he's like, there's 39 people injured, we're here, you can see people, they're streaming out the city, there's panic in the air. He painted this picture, and you know, we're sitting there, I'm like looking there like, streaming out the city, it's a traffic jam, people leaving, it's like rush hour, but, you know, according to him, he didn't even get out the car to ask. They're streaming out the city and they're panicked, and he did this whole build-up to make it seem like, you know, the world was coming to an end. This is what everybody in the US was hearing if they were tuned into ABC News that day. My question was like, okay, we're here. Let's go and ask the people what's going on. Let's go to one of the bomb sites. And they were like, no, we're veteran reporters. We've been doing this for years. Let's go to the hospital. He was like, well, why do we want to go to the hospital? We need to go to the hospital. So are we going to the hospital to interview victims, or we want to go to the sites where it actually happened? But they were like the veteran reporters. Even though I've been doing it just as long, but we said, okay, let's go. So we're the only ones at this hospital, and we're standing around, and they're like, we need to talk to an official from the hospital to get a press release. And people are looking at them like, huh? It's like, you're looking for a press release from the hospital to do what? To report back that this is what's going on, or are you going to actually do some investigation? So they didn't get a press release because nobody had a press release. We were the only people there. So we went over to the Edgware station. Immediately I get out my tape recorder, I go around, I start interviewing people. What happened? What do you think is going on? Why do you think this happened? And person after person said, oh, I think it's Tony Blair and George Bush, their policies. Tony Blair and George Bush. Women, Tony Blair, George Bush. Black people, Tony Blair, George Bush. Older people, Tony Blair. It just went on. I have an hour and a half worth of tape with people saying Tony Blair and George Bush and the policies that they had contributing to this act of terror. Now, we're sitting in front of a bombed out train station, and the first thing I noticed is that people aren't tripping. Remember, this guy was like, people are running around, they're scared. We're here, people just walking around like, there's no, like nothing happened. I got pictures, I got tapes, and somebody goes, why are you covering this? And it's like, well, you know, bomb the subway. And he goes, yeah, but this is like me coming to LA where I was living at the time and covering a shooting. That's what somebody said on tape. They said these things kind of happen all the time. We're used to it. It was no big deal. But not according to the people that I was with. Now, they were also interviewing people. Why do you think this happened? Was it Al Qaeda? No. It was Tony Blair and George Bush. They kept getting that over and over. So I saw CNN, and I saw ABC, and I saw Christian Science Monitor. You can record it, you can quote me on it, you can call them up. I stand by my word, and I was witness to it. Go to the hotel that was right across the street from that train station and look for American citizens to interview because nobody in London was giving them the answer that they wanted. So they found somebody. Well, I think it was Al-Qaeda. Boom. So my question at the time was, you just had a half hour, an hour's worth of interviews with people saying one thing. How are you going to balance that out? Are you going to give this Al-Qaeda narrative equal time, or are you going to actually explore why all these different people from diverse walks of life are saying the same thing? And the guy from ABC said, these people are dumb. They don't know what's going on. He'd never been to London before, but these people were dumb. So he never got the balance. Why do I tell this story? Because it's mass manipulation. It's deliberate misleading information. It's people who have the prestige of being a journalist. It's people who, by default, we have been raised to kind of trust. Like if you're on the news and you have the suit and tie on, you have the deep voice or the nice hair or whatever it is, and you look into the camera and say, you know, good evening, it's the 6 o'clock news, we're supposed to believe you, and we figure that you did the necessary work to get the information. But we see that that didn't happen. So if you could do that on something like a major issue like that, where one part of the world has one narrative and you over here have a different one, what sort of things are you flipping the script on in our respective communities where we don't even have a voice? So when you come along and say, the war on drugs is justified because everybody in East Oakland, they're all crackheads. And everybody in Windsor or certain parts of Santa Rosa, they're all illegal. And all the people on the campus probably smoke marijuana. They're hangovers from the hippie days. And you have people who are sitting back who figure that they must have did due diligence believing it. And then policies are set around that. And it's all connected to people who are waging a war on us. Just making sense what I'm saying here? Just making sense. I want to make sure that we're clear about it, because for many of us, we want to find some sort of out on this assertion. We want to find like, nah, you know what? You're exaggerating. This is not happening. People who I see and trust, who I might have even voted for, would not do really harmful things to me like this. They would not wage war on the population here in these United States. They wouldn't do that. There are people holding on to that. Hillary wouldn't do it. Donald wouldn't do it. Obama wouldn't do it. You know, pick the person. They're not going to do that. But we can see by collective action, that's what's happening. Domestic spying. I like having a black president. It was very powerful. I danced in the streets when he got elected. But I'm very clear he deported a couple of million people, broke up families. I'm clear that he led the way for domestic spying. And his policies kind of, are things that I would equate to a war against the people. Period. Some people don't want to let that go because it was history, but it's the truth. Hillary might be the same way. Want to see a woman in the White House? Sure. It's about time. It'd be great. But we're very clear of the roles that she's played over the years, and she's playing now. It is what it is. One thing about this, we may not be clear that there's a war, but I think they're very clear that there's a war. Institutional memory, institutionalizing policy is what this system does. So they haven't forgotten anything that happened in the past and adjusted themselves to deal with it in the future. So what was once illegal is now legal. So when they were doing COINTELPRO in the dead of night, now they can do it legally. Wow, yeah, we shouldn't have done it in the 60s, but you know what? I can search you now, and it's legal. And some of y'all even cheered when it was happening, because they studied the people and said, we need to go to the hood and maybe spy on those black people who are selling crack. And there was a whole lot of folks who said, there's a lot of black people that are sitting there going, yeah, you know, those white folks, who cares if you're able to break into their phones and get their messages? Maybe they know how we're feeling. So we'll cheer the government versus being opposed and standing alongside of Apple. We've seen some leaders cheer that on. And we can go down the list and see these contradictions. But when we kind of connect the dots, we've seen that these violations of our privacy, these intrusions in our day-to-day lives is all coming from the same space. And as a journalist, media plays a good role in shaping that understanding. I want to go back to this one part just so that you're clear when I talk about media. In 1971, when Nixon declared this war, there were some grave changes that took place in the years prior, during, and after. And you can see those changes today. First, I was at a Project Censored thing here, big shout out to Peter in the back, and I spoke one time about Martin Luther King giving this rare but very important speech, August 11th, 1967, to the National Association of Television and Radio Announcers in Atlanta, Georgia. He gives this speech and he says there's no civil rights movement without the aid of these black radio stations who were all around the country, who had a particular way in which they were able to frame the issues and make it palatable for the audience. They would play the music, they would intersperse it with chatter, they spoke the way that the community spoke, and they would make a march going across the Edmund Pettus Bridge sound like a trip to Summer Jam, you know, because they just knew how to connect with the people. And it was this whole style of being on the air as an advocacy for, you know, issues that they called being a personality jock. And there was a whole bunch of them. And King in his speech, he names them off. He goes, you know, Jack Gibson in Atlanta, and Georgia Woods in Philadelphia, and Too Tall Jones, and he names them all off. And he says there's no movement without these radio DJs who are key in shaping the opinions of the people that we need to reach. And he goes further. Remember this thing about culture? Remember we just showed this video? And what did the guy say? He said the FBI studies culture because if we can control the culture, we can control the people. Now let's go back to King in his speech in '67. He says the music of soul is something that has bridged gaps and allowed us to make integration easier. He said it's brought people together. And he talks about how people are doing the same dances. He talks about the Kennedys listening to the blues songs that he grew up with that now have come back with an English twist, referencing the Beatles. And he talks about the power of the music. This is Dr. King, 1967, giving this incredible speech. And he says there's no movement without it. Now, he has all these black radio DJs in the rooms, 1967. He's like, we have made this civil rights thing happen. Some of you all have been blamed unfairly for unrest that's taking place, because they were blaming black radio DJs for the riots in Watts, 1965. King talks about that. He says, but you're unfairly blamed. You're impacting the people. Now, these radio folks, they're like, this is good. We're going to meet next year, and we're going to buy radio stations, and we're going to increase our influence, and we're going to take this to the next level. 1968, NATRA meets, and the organization is destroyed. Organized crime shows up, beats up people, destroys it, and is just decimated. There's no more NATRA after 1968. And I'm looking at this speech. We can control the culture. We can control the people. And King's acknowledging there's no movement without this cultural piece. So that's one change. Second change is outlined in a book called Party Music by a colleague of mine named Ricky Vincent. And he writes his book about the Black Panthers and how the Black Panthers had a funk band called the Lumpin'. and that this funk band would take the popular songs of the day, flip the lyrics, give them some revolutionary spin, and that they were going to use this as a recruiting tool. So that's one thing. Second thing is that he talks about in the book, he says by the time Nixon puts this war out, this war on drugs, Hollywood gets involved. And they start to put out this type of movie called blaxploitation. And in these movies, we're talking about millions of dollars put behind these movies by some of these big Hollywood companies. Movies like Nigga Charlie, which was put out by Universal, grossed the most money ever for that particular company. Superfly, which had the soundtrack of a lifetime by Curtis Mayfield, and had all the bells and whistles highlighting the exploits of a cocaine dealer. But Ricky points out in these movies, this very interesting twist. The Black Panthers, who are celebrating their 50th anniversary this year, were well known for not allowing counter-revolutionary things to take place in the community, especially if you was in Oakland. So if you was a drug dealer, they were shutting you down. They were the ones that you needed to fear more than the police. They were not having it. But now in these movies, whether it's Superfly or all these other blaxploitation movies, the militant black nationalist person is now being lampooned. So Superfly's looking at the militant guys talking about y'all don't know what time it is, and he's basically more the hero than the people who are actually heroes in the community putting their lives and bodies on the line. And he talks about, pretty slowly, he said it wasn't the FBI that killed the Panthers, it was more or less Hollywood because it changed perception. And what I'm getting at is that war is not always fought with guns and bullets, it's also fought in how we can change people's mindsets. Is this making sense here? If I can make you think the world is flat, then I win. So he talks about this and he says, look, if they're lampooning the person who is most admired and in many ways feared by those who are counter-revolutionary and making them be buffoons. And he talks about, he says, by the time Superfly comes out, people went from wearing their hair in a natural to going back and wearing a perm. And so that thing starts to have its imprint, not just in the community, because people are going, well, maybe Superfly's the hero because, you know, he's always fighting the man. He's beating the mob, right? He's doing these things that he couldn't do in real life. And the militant guy, the Panther caricature is depicted as somebody who's weak. So now you have a new hero. Like, I'm gonna look up to this because you don't see a lot of black people on the screen at that time. And the one time you do have a revolutionary hero who challenges the system, it was a movie called Spook Who Sat by the Door, where a guy infiltrates the CIA and then he trains people and comes out and says, let's start guerrilla warfare to turn over the system. They banned that from the theaters. Put out by Greenleaf's his last name. I'll remember his first name in a minute. But the third thing that changes is in radio. The radio that Dr. King was talking about, the black radio stations that were so instrumental in helping frame the civil rights movement, all of a sudden they go through a change, and it goes something like this. They move from a situation where if you had the most people listening to your radio station, you could ask for the highest advertising dollars. I have 100 people, there's 150 people in the town, 100 of them are listening to me, give me the money. Madison Avenue, where a lot of these ad things are going on, they say, let's change the rules. Because black people, they only have like 1 or 2 radio stations, so they're always gonna win where they have where they have a sizable population. So it's no longer who has the most listeners, it's who has the richest listeners. And so this forced black radio to now have to change up a little. Because now they're looking at it and say, yeah, you got 100 people who listen, but they make $2 an hour. This rock station has 50 people listening, they make $10 an hour, so they get all the money and you don't. So black radio had to do 2 things. First thing is they stopped calling themselves black radio, and they came up with a term called urban. We're now the urban station. We carry that to this day. And it was code, and it was kind of designed to create the illusion that everybody who lives in the urban area, the urban San Francisco Bay Area, all y'all listen to KMEL, all of y'all. Or you listen to Wild. White, black, Latino, don't matter. It could be 90% black music we playing, but y'all listen to it, so it's the urban thing, right? Now those stations had to kind of let these advertisers know that they actually had white folks listening. So they started to play rock groups who were doing disco tunes at the time, Mick Jagger, Rod Stewart, all this stuff, and they pulled off the James Browns and the Sly Stones, and they changed the format. This is outlined in a book called Death of Rhythm and Blues by Nelson George. He goes into great detail about this, so I'm not making this up. You could read it, and he breaks it all down. So what does this have to do with anything? Well, what happens is radio, as Dr. King talks about in his speech, he says this is the primary source of information for black people. It's radio, not television. They listen to radio. Now this primary medium has changed. And it's no longer trying to target the black audience, but is now trying to seduce white, more affluent listeners, and they're playing music that they might like. At that time, it was disco, a la John Travolta. So black people in the community was like, some of that is okay, but these Bee Gees stuff I'm not really getting into. But there was a whole bunch of people who saw Saturday Night Fever that loved it, and that was being played on now these urban stations. And with this change came one last thing that we see to this day. The DJs that King was talking about, who shaped the movement, who were chatterboxes, who was like, let me tell you who's in town and why and where to go, and they could break it all down for you. They were like, y'all need to shut up, and we have a new format. It's called More Music, Less Talk. 15 in a row. Do you have that today? More music, less talk. We don't want you talking. We don't need your commentary. We just want you to play the music. We see this to this day. So you can turn on an urban station right now, and you will have, something that might be pretty important, like Mario Woods gets shot in Hunters Point. And people are protesting at the Super Bowl, and you turn on to your favorite station, More Music, Less Talk. They're not talking about that. They're not shouting out to people. They're not saying anything. Alicia Keys gets up on stage and says, I support the efforts to bring justice to Mario Woods. More music, less talk. While Fox News is filming Alicia Keys and going crazy on her. She's a cop supporter, a cop killer supporter, and all that other stuff, right? But the urban station that she's played on, they're not even saying, well, Alicia, why don't you come down and talk to us about it? It's a process of keeping people dumb and distracted. Dumb down the audience. Keep you all distracted. Keep the information just in a certain space. So this war that I'm talking about, part of it is an information war, as some people like to say. Keep the information packaged a certain way. Keep the information hidden from you. Keep you in a mind state where you start to normalize, excuse my language, bullshit. So now people are sitting here, and they actually will see a guy who's up there say, the Mexicans are criminals, the Mexicans are dirty, they're thieves, and we have legitimized that. We're like, well, he's a serious candidate, let's listen to him. We have normalized that. It's the same way we've normalized violence when we see it on TV. So now we have a whole generation of people that will pull out a cell phone. If I got into a fight with this gentleman right here, you have a bunch of people, maybe not in this room, but many of our classmates and colleagues, instead of breaking it up, would be like, let's film this and put it on World Star. Have we not seen that? Right? So it's not about can we solve the problem. It's like, how can we get more of this fixed? And this is part of what has gone on in this war. This war against the people using media. Part of it is called learned behavior. When I worked for Time Warner, my bosses at the time said, reinforce learned behavior. That's your job. What is learned behavior? We have studied the people in the community. We know that they like purple over green. We know they like low voices over high voices. They know they like men over women or whatever it is. And your job is to reinforce the learned behavior. They want to hear Tupac the Thug more than maybe Public Enemy who's talking about fight the power. They want to hear the guy who's selling keys more than the person who's trying to get the key to unlock the code for a computer program. And even if it's not the community that rejects it, there's still an outside community who draw their perceptions on that. So they sit there and go, well, you know, that's black culture. They want to sell keys and sell crack and bust caps in people's asses. How do you know? Because I've been fed this over and over and over again to the point that now I intuitively think that before I think anything else. So if I wear this tracksuit versus the blazer that I was going to wear, people think, you got all red. If I'm in LA, it's red, it must be a blood, or Norteño, or an athlete, or any other thing than somebody who holds a couple of degrees. And that's something that is the process of keeping people in a particular box so that box can be manipulated. And so this war that we have, and this war that comes on many fronts, and I'm just focusing on how media manipulation plays it out, puts us at this point like, well, what do we do about it? I can expend a problem, but what do we do? First thing I say to people is that all of us need to really push younger generation, our brothers and sisters who are in first, second, third grade. They need to learn how to be journalists. And when I say journalists, I'm not talking about, you know, what maybe Peter or Mickey or others will do where they're like, you know, we're going to do investigative reporting and, you know, go down and pull all these papers. But we're talking about just some basics where you might ask the question, you just said a statement in this news piece. What else was going on at the time? What did you leave out? What didn't you put in? Why did you emphasize that angle versus another angle? You know, just raising questions about who is this particular piece of news or information? Who is it targeting? You got somebody who's inarticulate on the TV, trying to explain something. Why did you pick that person versus somebody else? Who made that call? Today we're going to talk about the terrorism in Brussels. Why didn't we talk about the one that took place in the Ivory Coast or Nigeria? Who made that call? Why didn't we just show all three? Somebody made that call, and who did? And what was the reason for it? These are questions that our first and second graders should be asking. The other thing is that we want to get them to start thinking critically so that when information comes to them, they can discern it and they just don't become a consumer, a media consumer, which many of us are. They're an active participant. They're like, okay, I have questions and I'm going to do some investigation of my own. Now, many of us have the tools for journalism. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, all that stuff, but are we acting like journalists in a way that can be empowering? Is this making sense what I'm saying? Because believe me, right now, this system is set up so every picture we take, every post that we put up there, they're selling advertisements based upon that. They're going through our timeline and using algorithms. So if you say, I like the Raiders and you like the 49ers, my feed doesn't show up on your thing like that. You see what I'm saying? So you're not getting the information all the time. So these are things, you know, so all the news is being customized for each person. We need to stop that so that we can all be at least privy to some of the information that's going on. The other thing that we need to do we need to understand that we're at a point now where truth is a casualty of this war. And when I say truth is a casualty of this war, that's an old saying. What I really mean is that we now have a population, because of this learned behavior, because of this habit. When I was at KMEL and Clear Channel, they said, you know, make the station a habit that people can't quit. I don't care if they like the music or not, make sure they know the slogan. More, you know, the people station, hip hop and R&B, right? That was what they said. You enforce that over and over again, so even if they don't listen, they know our call letters. and make it a habit. So they're not a fan of the artist we play, but they're a fan of the apparatus that presents the artist. That was a game plan by Clear Channel, right? All across its properties. So what we have now is people who are addicted to a personality or addicted to an entity that presents the information, so it doesn't matter whether they're truthful or not. Doesn't matter. It's like, oh yeah, they may have lied, but who cares? I get satisfaction from consuming or being a part of this larger body. If you don't believe me, just watch the lies that are being told during this presidential campaign. Even when you point out the truth, people are like, yeah, but I still like this person anyway. Are we not seeing that? Are we not seeing that? All Mexicans are not thieves. Yeah, but I still like that guy anyway. She's probably, you're anti-war. She's about her business with this war thing. Yeah, I hear you, but you know what? Like her anyway. Really? But you got the truth in front of you. Yeah, but you know, I'm still gonna ride. He's deporting a whole bunch of people. And he's spying on folks. And he's building more prisons than he is funding schools. Yeah, but I like his wife and his kids, so I like them, and I'm still gonna roll. And so we gotta get out of that habit where we just keep on keeping on even in the face of truth. Truth is a casualty. It used to be a time when you were exposed to it, you would be like, you know what, we need to change, or we need to push for change, or we need to withhold our support until it's a more righteous type of situation. But nowadays, we kind of like, I'll just go along just to get along. Some of it is because we feel like we can't make the change. Some of it is because it's overwhelming. But more likely, it's because we just got into a habit. And it's a hard habit for us to break. So we have to find ways in which to do that. Many of us will have to become better storytellers. And I'll close with this. You know, it used to be a saying that, you know, at least when I was younger, it used to be about being right. How right can I be? You know, the sky is blue. I'm right. And sometimes it's not about that. Sometimes it's really just having a relationship with the people and establishing some sort of ongoing dialogue. Let me make this plain. My partner didn't know that I was supposed to be speaking here this afternoon. Oh, that's what she said. She was like, you're going to Santa Rosa. Who's picking up the kids? It's like, I told you last week I'm going to be doing a talk. It's like, no, you didn't. Now, I know damn well I told her that I'm going to be in Santa Rosa on Wednesday. I know I did that. But she's like, no, you didn't. Now, in my younger days, I would have argued and I would have been like, here's a tape recorder. I said it, I'm right. And then I would have a pissed off partner. Wifey's not feeling me on that, right? So, you know, being a little bit older, I'm wise. It's like, you know what, dear, you're right. I'm going to try better. I'm going to communicate with you, and I'm going to let you know next time, and my bad, my fault, and I'll make it up to you, right? So what am I talking about? It's not about being right. It's about making sure that we have this relationship going. This making sense what I'm saying? So a lot of times when we're talking to folks, and we understand these truths that I'm talking about, how do we deliver it to folks so that they can accept it when they're caught up in just, you know, in this habit? Banging them over the head just to be right is not going to cut it. But having a dialogue and being good at this dialogue is something that we're going to have to all work on so that people can start to slowly remove themselves from this fog that many of us are subjected to. All of us are subjected to it. Just it might be one area that we're clear about, foggy in another, clear in another area, foggy in another, so we can all benefit from being defogged and at the same time have clarity where we can help others defog themselves. But the point that I'm getting at is that we're at a point now that if we don't change the direction in which we're headed in terms of how we're communicating, how we're disseminating information, how we're engaging people above and beyond just a few personalities. If we don't see journalism, for example, as a communal thing where all of us participate and all of us have roles to play versus just one charismatic figure giving a talk or being on TV or on the radio, then we're going to have a price to pay. because those who are in power have studied us to a great deal, and I think they're executing a game plan that's going to be against many of our interests. And so, as I close out, I think what I just want to leave folks with is, as I said before, one, understand that people are running a game on us. We are at war. We are in a serious war right now, a war for the hearts and minds of our community. And I would say at this point, we're also in a war just to maintain our own sense of sanity. We're in a war just to make sure that we're not buying into the craziness that's going on, that we're not sitting up there cheering and, and co-signing some of the madness that's being presented to us in a seductive and a very nice package. How do we get out of that? How do we not be a part of that problem? How do we not join the fray? So that's going to take us networking with one another, constantly sharpening each other's swords, getting information from other places and making that the norm versus just what is conveniently presented to us. Understanding that those in power are going to do everything that they possibly can to maintain that power. If this guy is telling me what the FBI is able to do you think things have improved, or do you think it's been ratcheted up? I think it's been ratcheted up. I think it's been, the only difference is now we've been fed over and over again a type of scenario where we actually will justify it. Well, you know what? They need to spy on my iPhone. We don't want the terrorists to get us. You know what? We need the police, stopping and frisking everybody. There's a lot of black people selling crack. You know what? We need raids in our community to make sure people have citizenship. We need to make sure that these women don't have no choices. We can go down the list of this intrusion that we have now come to accept as the norm. So I'm going to close here, and I'm just, communicating something in terms of just trying to inspire people to wake up. Wake up at a time when folks are trying to distract us. Wake up at a time when people are trying to, those in power, when I say people, those who are in power are trying to disenfranchise us individually and collectively. Wake up when people are trying to divide us. Keep us in a perpetual rat race, keep us under stress continuously. So that's only going to change when we make a commitment that we're going to fight this war tooth and nail. We're going to be smarter than those who are trying to wage this on us. And lastly, we're going to learn to love each other. And when I say love, I'm not talking about something that's kind of phony, baloney, and all that. I'm talking about you have a principled love and caring for the well-being of the people around you. Like you love the folks around you. It's like they call agape love. Like I really want to see people do better. So when I'm speaking, it's coming from that place. It's not coming from like I want to be right. It's not like I want to manipulate. No, I want to see everybody be able to have the basics in life. I want to see people's kids be able to survive in a world or live in a world where they don't have all these challenges, many that are encroaching on us and making it seem like we'll never get out of these predicaments. A love that means that we care immensely about people's well-being. When we see people in trouble, our first intuition is like, how do we correct that? How can we lift them up? How can we stop what's harming you? Versus sitting back and saying, is this a world star hip hop moment? Versus sitting back and saying, well, better than me. Like, I got mine, get yours type of attitude. So that's where I'm at. So thank you for hearing me out. Thank you for watching the videos. And if we have any questions, we can build. So thank you very much.